What if the family you loved threw you into a dark, suffocating hole and sold you to strangers for a handful of silver coins?
Why kill him when we can sell him? He is our own flesh. 20 pieces of silver. Done.
What would you do if the people who threw you in a pit and sold you to die suddenly bowed at your feet, begging for food? Would you take revenge, or would you do the unthinkable? But this isn't just the story of a boy betrayed by his own blood. You will see how a forgotten slave rose to command the greatest empire on earth, how he survived the darkest dungeons of Egypt, and the shocking, terrifying moment he finally came face to face with the men who tried to destroy him. If these stories connect with you, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. It means the world to us. Now let's begin. Long before the golden palaces of Egypt, and long before the heavy iron chains of a royal dungeon, there was a family in the sun-baked land of Canaan. The patriarch, Jacob, was an old man who had lived a life full of struggle. He had 12 sons, but his heart had always belonged to one woman. Her name was Rachel. For many agonizing years, Rachel could not have children. She watched in silent sorrow as Jacob's other wives filled the tents with sons. But Jacob loved her more than the rest, and he never gave up hope. Finally, a miracle happened. Heaven opened its doors, and Rachel gave birth to a boy. They named him Joseph. He was the absolute joy of Jacob's life, a living, breathing testament to the love of his youth. But tragedy soon struck the family. Years later, while they were traveling, Rachel went into severe, agonizing labor. In her final moments, she gave birth to a second son, Benjamin. As her soul was departing, Rachel passed away on the dusty road to Bethlehem. Jacob buried the absolute love of his life in the dirt, his heart completely shattered. From that day on, Joseph and little Benjamin, the only two sons of his beloved Rachel, became the fiercely protected center of his universe. They were all he had left of her. As Joseph grew into a striking 17-year-old young man, Jacob made a fateful decision. He wanted the entire world to know how much he cherished this boy. He wanted a visible symbol of his incredible favor. So he hired the finest weavers to create a magnificent garment. It was a long, sweeping coat, woven with the most vibrant royal colors imaginable. It was a garment fit for a prince, not a shepherd. Jacob presented it to Joseph under the shade of their largest tent, his ancient hands trembling with pride.
"This is for you, my son. Wear it proudly. It is a symbol of my love."
Father, it is beautiful. I have never seen anything like this. I will wear it every single day.
But that beautiful coat carried a heavy, invisible price. Every time Joseph walked through the camp, the bright colors flashed against the dusty landscape, serving as a constant, blinding reminder to his older brothers. They were the ones who worked out in the scorching heat. They were the ones who managed the massive flocks, yet they were treated like ordinary workers, while Joseph paraded around like royalty. The older brothers watched from a distance, gripping their wooden staffs. The seeds of jealousy that had been planted years ago were now blooming into absolute hatred. They despised his youth. They despised his favor. Most of all, they despised the coat.
Look at him walking around like he owns the very ground we work on.
Our father treats us like strangers in our own home.
He does not lift a single finger in the fields. Let him keep wearing that coat. One day, the desert will swallow it up.
They could not even bring themselves to speak a peaceful word to him. Every interaction was laced with poison. But Joseph, young and perhaps a little naive to the deadly danger growing in his own home, continued to wear his father's gift. He had no idea that a much bigger storm was about to break, and it would start not with a weapon, but with a dream. The tension in the camp was already at a breaking point when God decided to speak to the young boy. Joseph had a dream that was so vivid, so breathtakingly real. When he woke up, his heart was racing. He was so filled with innocent wonder that he immediately ran to find his brothers as they were eating their morning meal.
You have to hear what I saw last night. We were all out in the middle of the field, tying up bundles of wheat. Suddenly, my bundle stood straight up, and then all of your bundles gathered around mine and bowed completely down to the ground.
The brothers stopped eating. The silence in the camp was deafening. They stared at the teenager in his royal coat, their faces twisting with a dark, terrifying fury. To them, this was not a divine revelation. This was an insult.
Do you intend to reign over us? Will you actually rule us? Do you really think we, your older brothers, will ever bow our faces to the dirt for you?
If you believe God gives us dreams for a purpose, even when others doubt them, comment, "I trust His plan," right now. The hatred doubled that morning. They wanted to crush his spirit, to make him realize his place. But heaven was not finished. A few nights later, an even more spectacular vision flooded Joseph's mind. This time, the dream left the earth entirely and went into the starry sky. He ran to the main tent where his father Jacob was sitting alongside the angry brothers.
I had another one. It was incredible. I was looking up at the sky, and the sun, the moon, and 11 stars were all bowing down to me.
This time, even Jacob was caught off guard. The meaning was clear and terrifying. The sun and moon clearly represented the parents, and the 11 stars were his brothers. Jacob stood up, his brow deeply furrowed, feeling the dangerous energy radiating from his older sons.
Joseph, what kind of dream is this? Are you saying that your mother, your brothers, and even I will come and bow to the ground before you? You must guard your words carefully.
Jacob rebuked him to keep the peace, but deep down, the old man's heart skipped a beat. He remembered how God had spoken to his grandfather Abraham and his father Isaac. Jacob did not dismiss the vision. He kept the matter locked away in his mind, wondering what God was preparing to do. But the brothers did not wonder. They burned with bitter anger. The dreams were the final straw. They were no longer just annoyed by a spoiled younger brother. They were deeply, violently threatened by a boy who claimed that heaven itself had crowned him king. Sometime later, the older brothers took the massive flocks of sheep far away to the grazing lands near Shechem. Jacob, worrying about their safety in the wild, called for his favorite son.
Go and see if your brothers are safe, and check on the flocks. Bring word back to me.
I will go right now, Father.
Joseph wrapped his colorful coat around his shoulders and began the long journey. He searched through Shechem, asking travelers for directions, until a man told him the brothers had moved further north to Dothan. Joseph pressed on, completely unaware that he was walking directly into a trap. From a high ridge in Dothan, the brothers spotted a figure walking across the horizon. The bright colors of the coat gave him away instantly. They watched him approach, and all the years of jealousy, the anger over the dreams, and the absolute disdain for his favor boiled over into a deadly plot.
Here comes that dreamer. Come now, let's kill him and throw him into one of these cisterns. This is our chance. We are miles away from our father. Let us kill him right now and throw his body into one of these dry wilderness pits. We can say a vicious wild animal tore him to pieces. Then we will finally see what becomes of his grand dreams.
But Reuben, the oldest brother, felt a sudden strike of panic. He knew the guilt of murder would destroy their family forever. He had to think fast to save the boy's life.
No, we cannot shed his blood. We are not murderers.
Just strip him of that ridiculous coat and throw him into this deep pit alive. Let the desert deal with him.
Reuben secretly planned to sneak back later that night, pull Joseph out of the hole, and return him safely to Jacob. The brothers agreed to the compromise. As soon as Joseph reached their camp, smiling and exhausted from the journey, they surrounded him like a pack of wolves.
Brothers, I finally found you. Father sent me to.
Before he could finish, they grabbed him violently. They tore the beautiful coat right off his back, ignoring his desperate cries. They dragged him to the edge of a deep, dark cistern and threw him down into the suffocating darkness.
Please, what are you doing? I am your brother. Reuben, Judah, please do not leave me down here.
The brothers coldly walked away from the screaming pit and sat down to eat their lunch. As they chewed their bread, a long caravan of Ishmaelite traders appeared on the horizon, their camels loaded with precious spices bound for Egypt.
What will we gain if we kill our brother and cover up his blood?
Come, let's sell him to the Ishmaelites. We get rid of him forever, and we make a profit.
They hauled a weeping, terrified Joseph out of the pit. They traded his freedom for 20 pieces of silver. Joseph was bound in heavy chains and dragged away toward the scorching sands of Egypt, watching his brothers fade into the distance. When Reuben returned to the pit later and found it empty, he tore his clothes in absolute despair. The brothers then took Joseph's beautiful coat, slaughtered a goat, and soaked the royal fabric in thick blood. They carried the ruined garment back to Canaan and threw it at their father's feet.
We found this out in the wilderness. See if it belongs to your son.
Jacob collapsed to the floor. The sight of the blood shattered his mind. He pulled at his hair and wept with a volume that shook the entire camp.
It is my son's coat. A wild animal has eaten him. Joseph has surely been torn to pieces.
Jacob put on rough sackcloth and mourned for his son for many days, refusing to let anyone comfort him. He believed his favorite son was dead, but miles away, across a brutal desert, Joseph was very much alive. The journey to Egypt was a brutal nightmare of heat, thirst, and exhaustion. Joseph was dragged into a massive, bustling slave market. He was stripped of his identity and placed on an auction block. He was purchased by a man named Potiphar, a terrifying and powerful figure who served as the captain of Pharaoh's royal guard. Joseph was taken to a magnificent Egyptian estate, a world of grand pillars, lush gardens, and immense wealth. But God had not abandoned the boy from Canaan. The Lord wrapped his favor around Joseph like an invisible shield. Everything Joseph touched turned to gold. He worked harder than any other servant. He was brilliant, honest, and wildly successful. Potiphar quickly noticed that this young Hebrew was entirely different from anyone else.
I do not know what God you serve, boy, but the blessing of heaven is clearly upon your hands.
From this day forward, you are my personal steward. You will command my entire estate. Everything I own is under your control.
Joseph went from a prisoner in chains to the absolute ruler of a massive household. Potiphar trusted him so completely that he didn't even keep track of his own money. He only cared about what food was put on his table. As Joseph grew older, he became an incredibly handsome and well-built man. And in the shadows of the beautiful estate, someone was watching him. Potiphar's wife. She desired the young Hebrew steward, and she was a woman who was used to getting exactly what she wanted. Day after day, she approached him, speaking in hushed, demanding tones.
The house is empty, Joseph. Come and sleep with me. No one will ever know.
My master has trusted me with his entire life. He has held absolutely nothing back from me except you, because you are his wife. How then could I do such a wicked thing and sin against God?
He refused her constantly, going out of his way to avoid being in the same room. But one afternoon, Joseph entered the main house to do his work, completely unaware that she had sent all the other servants away. She trapped him in the grand hallway. She grabbed him by his heavy linen garment, her eyes wild with desperation and anger.
I said, come to bed with me.
Joseph knew that staying to argue would be his downfall. He twisted his body, slipped out of the garment, and ran out the front doors into the blinding sunlight, leaving the cloak entirely in her hands. Humiliated, rejected, and furious, she stared at the empty fabric. A wicked plan formed in her mind. She began to scream at the top of her lungs, calling the guards back to the house.
Look at what my husband has brought into our home.
This Hebrew slave came into my room to attack me. I screamed with all my might.
And he got terrified. He ran away, but he left his cloak right here beside my bed.
When Potiphar returned home and heard the venomous lie, his rage was absolute. The man he had trusted like a son had seemingly betrayed him in the worst possible way. Potiphar did not ask for a trial. He ordered his guards to seize Joseph immediately. Once again, Joseph was stripped of his position. He was dragged away from the beautiful gardens and thrown into the king's prison, a dark, damp, terrifying underground fortress where Pharaoh's political enemies were locked away to rot. The heavy iron doors slammed shut. Joseph sat in the cold, absolute darkness. He had done the right thing. He had honored God, and his reward was a cold stone floor. But the unstoppable favor of God followed Joseph straight through the prison bars. Even in the gloom, Joseph's character shone brightly. He did not sink into bitter depression. He served, he organized, and very quickly the chief warden noticed his unbreakable spirit. The warden put Joseph in charge of all the other prisoners. Sometime later, the heavy doors opened to admit two highly important men. The chief cupbearer and the chief baker of Pharaoh's palace had angered the king, and they were thrown into Joseph's cell block. One morning, Joseph was bringing them their water and noticed both men sitting on the floor, their faces pale and stricken with terror.
Why are your faces so heavy with sadness today? We both had dreams last night. Terrifying, vivid dreams.
And there is no wise man down in this dungeon to tell us what they mean.
Do not interpretations belong to God? Tell me your dreams.
The cupbearer nervously explained his vision. He saw a grapevine with 3 branches that rapidly blossomed into perfect grapes. He squeezed the grapes directly into Pharaoh's royal cup and handed it to the king.
The meaning is good. The 3 branches are 3 days. In exactly 3 days,
Pharaoh will lift you up and restore you to your prestigious job.
but please, when you are standing in the palace, remember me.
Tell Pharaoh I was kidnapped, and I have done nothing to deserve this hole.
Hearing the good news, the baker eagerly shared his dream. He saw 3 baskets of beautiful bread sitting on his head, but a flock of black birds descended from the sky and ate all the bread meant for the king. Joseph's face fell. The truth was heavy.
The 3 baskets are 3 days. In exactly 3 days, Pharaoh will cut off your head, and the birds will eat your flesh.
3 days later, on Pharaoh's birthday, It happened exactly as Joseph had spoken. The baker was executed. The cupbearer was washed, dressed in fine clothes, and placed right back at the king's right hand. But as the cupbearer drank the sweet wine of freedom, he completely forgot about the Hebrew slave rotting in the dark. 2 full, agonizing years passed. Joseph remained trapped in the stone prison, but heaven was finally ready to move. And this time, God sent a dream to the most powerful man on the planet. Pharaoh tossed and turned in his royal bed. He dreamed he was standing by the Nile River. 7 fat, beautiful cows emerged from the water. But then 7 horrific, skeletal cows crawled out of the mud and violently devoured the fat cows. He woke up sweating. When he fell back asleep, he dreamed of 7 plump, healthy heads of grain being swallowed whole by 7 scorched, dead heads of grain. In the morning, Pharaoh was in complete panic. He summoned every magician, priest, and wise man in the empire. None of them could understand the terrifying visions. Standing by the throne, the cupbearer suddenly turned white. The memory of the dungeon hit him like a physical blow.
My king, I have made a terrible mistake. When I was in the prison, there was a young Hebrew slave. He told me my dream perfectly. Everything he said came true.
Bring him to me at once.
Pharaoh did not hesitate. He ordered his guards to the prison. Joseph was hauled out of the darkness, rapidly shaved, given fresh linen clothes, and rushed into the dazzling, gold-covered throne room.
I have had a dream, and no man in my kingdom can explain it.
I have heard that when you hear a dream, you can interpret it.
I cannot do it, but God will give Pharaoh the answer he desires.
Pharaoh described the starving cows and the scorched grain. Joseph stood tall, fearless before the living God of Egypt.
The dreams are one and the same. God is showing you what He is about to do. The 7 fat cows and grain are 7 years of massive, unprecedented abundance.
But the 7 thin cows are 7 years of brutal, devastating famine
that will completely wipe out the memory of the good years. You must find a wise man immediately to store grain during the good years, or this country will die.
Pharaoh looked at his advisors, then stared at the young Hebrew.
Since God has made all this known to you, there is no one so discerning and wise as you.
You shall be in charge of my palace, and all my people are to submit to your orders. Only the throne itself will be greater than you.
Pharaoh took his royal signet ring and placed it on Joseph's hand. He clothed him in garments of fine, pristine linen and placed a massive golden collar of authority around his neck. The boy, who was once violently thrown into a dark pit, once sold for 20 pieces of silver and falsely forgotten in a prison, now rode in the royal chariot as second in command. Men cried out before him, "Bow the knee!" He was 30 years old. Pharaoh gave him a new name, Zephnath-Paneah. He also gave him a wife, Asenath, the daughter of an Egyptian priest. Before the years of famine arrived, she bore him 2 sons.
I will name him Manasseh, for God has made me forget all my trouble and all my father's household. I will name him Ephraim, for God has made me fruitful in the land of my suffering.
The 7 years of abundance came, just as Joseph had promised. The land produced plentifully, and Joseph gathered grain like the sand of the sea, so much that they finally stopped measuring it. The slave from the pit was now the governor of the world. Joseph had conquered Egypt. But then, the skies turned to brass. The rivers shrank. The 7 years of plenty ended violently, and a devastating famine swept across the entire earth. Nations began to starve, the ground cracked, and despair settled over the surrounding lands. Across the burning desert, the deadly famine was about to push the very brothers who betrayed him right to his doorstep. The past was about to collide with the present, setting the stage for the greatest test of his life. Back in the dry hills of Canaan, the famine had a terrifying grip on Jacob and his family. Their crops had failed completely. The massive flocks they once proudly tended were growing dangerously thin. Starvation was literally knocking at their door. Jacob gathered his older sons around him. The old patriarch looked deeply exhausted, his eyes reflecting the desperation of their reality.
Why do you just stand here looking at one another? I have heard there is grain down in Egypt. Go down there and buy some food so that we may live and not die.
The 10 older brothers prepared for the long, dangerous journey south. But Jacob firmly held one son back. Benjamin, the absolute youngest, was the only remaining child of his beloved wife Rachel. The memory of losing Joseph still haunted Jacob's every waking moment.
Benjamin will not go down with you. If any harm should come to him on the road, it would break my heart forever. He stays here with me.
And so the 10 men set out across the scorching desert, joining massive caravans of foreigners, all desperately seeking survival. They eventually arrived in the sprawling, majestic capital of Egypt. They were directed to the central courtyards where the grain was being rationed and sold. Towering above the crowds on an elevated platform stood the Egyptian governor. He spoke with absolute authority, dictating the flow of life-saving food. The brothers approached, trembling with the exhaustion of travel, and threw themselves completely face down on the ground to show respect to the ruler. From his high position, Joseph looked down at the dusty travelers. His heart slammed violently against his chest. Even with the passing of over 20 long years, he recognized them instantly. There was Reuben, there was Simeon, there was Judah. The dreams from his youth flashed before his eyes. The sheaves of wheat bowing down, the stars dropping to the earth. It was happening right in front of him. The brothers had absolutely no idea who they were bowing to. To them, this was a terrifying Egyptian lord in royal makeup and golden chains. They never could have imagined that the boy they threw into an empty desert pit was now the second most powerful man on the entire planet. Joseph could have revealed himself right then. He could have ordered his guards to execute them. Instead, he decided to test them. He needed to know if they were the same ruthless, jealous men who tore off his coat, or if time had changed their hearts. Joseph kept his royal demeanor completely intact. He purposely used a harsh, commanding tone, speaking to them through an Egyptian interpreter so they would not recognize his native language.
Where do you people come from? You look suspicious. You are spies. You have come to see where our land is weak and unguarded.
The brothers were instantly terrified. Being accused of espionage by an Egyptian ruler meant certain death. They scrambled to defend their honor from the dirt floor.
No, my lord. We are completely honest men. We are not spies. I do not believe you. I say you are spies. You are looking for a way to conquer us while we are dealing with the famine.
Sir, please listen. Your servants are 12 brothers, the sons of one man back in the land of Canaan.
The youngest is with our father today, and one of our brothers is no more.
The mention of their father and little Benjamin struck a deep emotional chord within Joseph. but he masked it with fierce intensity.
This is exactly how I will test your story. By the life of Pharaoh, you will not leave this place until your youngest brother comes here to prove your words.
One of you can go and bring him. The rest of you will stay locked in my prison.
Joseph ordered his royal guards to seize the men. They were thrown into the dark Egyptian dungeon for 3 agonizing days. It was a terrifying taste of the exact same medicine they had forced upon Joseph decades earlier. On the 3rd day, Joseph brought them back into the light. He offered them a slightly better deal, proving he was not a complete tyrant.
Do this and you will live, for I fear God.
Let one of your brothers stay here, bound in prison. The rest of you may take grain back for your starving families. But you must bring your youngest brother to me.
Thinking the Egyptian governor could not understand their Hebrew language, the brothers began to argue bitterly among themselves. The crushing guilt of their past had finally caught up to them.
This is a punishment. We are suffering all of this because of what we did to our little brother. We saw his deep distress when he pleaded with us from that pit, and we completely ignored him.
Did I not warn you? I told you not to sin against the boy. But you would not listen. Now his blood is required of us.
Hearing their deep remorse, Joseph was completely overwhelmed. The royal act cracked. He quickly turned his back to them, walked away, and wept silently. After regaining his composure, he returned, pointed directly at Simeon, and ordered the guards to bind him tightly while the others watched in horror. Joseph secretly ordered his royal stewards to fill the brothers' empty sacks to the absolute brim with premium grain. But he added one extremely strange command. He ordered the stewards to take the heavy silver coins the brothers had used for payment and hide the money right back inside the tops of their sacks. The brothers loaded their exhausted donkeys and fled the city, leaving a bound Simeon behind. They were desperate to get home, but on their journey, when they stopped to rest at an encampment, one of the brothers untied his grain sack to feed his animal. He reached inside and felt something hard and cold. He pulled out his entire bundle of silver. Panic ripped through the camp.
Look! My money has been returned. It is right here in my sack.
Their hearts completely sank. They were already accused of being spies. Now they looked like outright thieves who had stolen from the second most powerful man in Egypt. They trembled with fear, wondering what God was doing to them. When they finally reached the dusty hills of Canaan, they poured out the terrifying story to their father Jacob. They explained the harsh governor, the accusation, Simeon being held hostage, and the impossible demand to bring Benjamin back. To make matters worse, as they emptied their sacks in front of Jacob, every single brother found his bundle of silver hidden in the grain. They all stepped back in absolute terror. Jacob looked at the silver, then looked at his remaining sons with a heart full of bitter grief.
You have deprived me of my children. Joseph is gone. Simeon is gone. And now you want to take Benjamin away from me too? Everything is completely against me.
Father, you can trust me with him. If I do not bring him back to you safely, you may put my own 2 sons to death. My son will not go down there with you. His brother is dead, and he is the only one left from his mother.
If any harm falls on him, you will bring my gray head down to the grave in sorrow.
The argument ended, and for a time they tried to survive on the Egyptian grain. But the famine was relentless. The skies offered no rain. The earth remained cracked and dead. Eventually, the food ran out entirely, and the family faced the grim reality of starvation.
Go back down to Egypt and buy us a little more food.
We cannot go back. The man gave us a severe warning. He said we would not even see his face unless our youngest brother was standing right beside us.
Why did you bring this terrible trouble on me? Why did you even tell the man you had another brother?
He asked us directly about our family. How could we possibly know he would demand to see the boy? Send Benjamin with me, and we will go at once.
If I do not bring him back and set him safely before you, let me bear the blame before you forever.
Broken, defeated, and starving, Jacob finally relented. He ordered them to take the finest gifts of the land, balm, honey, spices, and myrrh, along with double the silver to repay the mysterious returned money.
May God Almighty grant you mercy before the man, so that he will let your other brother and Benjamin come back with you.
With heavy hearts, the brothers took Benjamin and began the terrifying trek back to the palace. When the brothers arrived in Egypt and stood before Joseph, the governor's eyes immediately locked onto Benjamin. Seeing his own full brother, born of the same mother, Joseph was flooded with an intense wave of emotion. He ordered his steward to take the men directly to his private estate and prepare a massive feast. The brothers were terrified, thinking they were being led into a trap because of the returned silver. But instead, Simeon was released to them, and they were seated at a grand banquet table. Joseph amazed them by seating them in the exact order of their ages, from the oldest to the youngest. The brothers stared at each other in complete shock. How could this Egyptian lord possibly know their birth order? And when the royal food was served, Joseph gave Benjamin 5 times as much as anyone else. They ate and drank freely, feeling a rare moment of relief. But the final, ultimate test was about to begin. The next morning, Joseph commanded his steward to fill their sacks with food. But then he handed the steward his own personal, highly valuable silver cup.
Take my silver cup and hide it deep inside the sack of the youngest brother.
The brothers left the city at dawn, feeling incredibly happy and successful. But they had barely reached the edge of town when the Egyptian steward rode up behind them in a furious dust cloud, shouting for them to halt.
Why have you repaid good with evil? You have stolen my master's royal silver cup.
What are you talking about? We are honest men. We even brought back the silver we found the first time.
If the cup is found with any of us, let that man die, and the rest of us will become your slaves.
The steward began the terrifying search. He checked the oldest brother's sack first. Nothing. He moved down the line, sack by sack, building the tension. Finally, he reached the youngest. He tore open Benjamin's sack, dug his hand into the grain, and pulled out the gleaming silver cup. The brothers screamed in horror. They tore their clothes in absolute crushing despair. They loaded their donkeys and were marched straight back to the governor's palace, like dead men walking. They threw themselves on the hard stone floor before Joseph.
What is this wicked thing you have done?
Did you not realize that a man like me can uncover secrets? What can we possibly say to my lord?
God has uncovered the guilt of your servants. We are now all your slaves.
No, I will not punish the innocent. Only the man who stole my cup will be my slave.
The rest of you are free to go back to your father in peace.
This was it, the ultimate trap. 20 years ago, they had happily thrown Joseph away to get rid of him. Now they were being offered a completely free pass to walk away and abandon Benjamin to slavery. But Judah, the very brother who had once suggested selling Joseph for 20 pieces of silver, stepped forward. His voice cracked with immense pain and raw desperation.
Please, my lord, let your servant speak.
You asked about our family, and we told you our father's life is entirely bound up in this boy.
His brother is dead, and his mother is dead. If I go back without him, my father will literally drop dead from grief.
Judah dropped to his knees, making the ultimate, selfless offer.
Now then, please let your servant remain here as my lord's slave in place of the boy, and let the boy return with his brothers.
Judah's incredible sacrifice shattered every single wall Joseph had built. The governor of Egypt could not hold his tears for another second.
Leave this place immediately!
He yelled at the top of his lungs for every Egyptian servant and guard to leave the throne room immediately. Joseph was left completely alone with his brothers. The silence was thick and terrifying. Then, Joseph began to weep so loudly that the sound echoed through the halls and reached Pharaoh's household. The brothers were frozen in confusion. Then, the powerful Egyptian lord wiped his eyes, stepped down from his throne, and spoke in their native Hebrew tongue.
I am Joseph. Is my father really still alive?
The brothers jumped back in sheer absolute terror. Their minds could not process the impossibility. The boy they had abused, the boy they had sold, was standing before them, holding the power of life and death over their heads. They could not even speak a single word.
Come closer to me, please.
They slowly stepped forward, trembling like leaves in the wind.
I am your brother Joseph, the one you sold into Egypt.
Joseph did not seek revenge. He offered them a perspective that completely redefined their entire lives. He showed them the majestic, sovereign grace of God.
And now, do not be distressed, and do not be angry with yourselves for selling me here. Because it was to save lives that God sent me ahead of you. It was not you who sent me to Egypt. It was God.
He sent me ahead of you to make sure our family survives.
Please, don't carry this guilt anymore. Do not be angry with yourselves for what you did.
We still have 5 more years of famine ahead of us.
Joseph stepped forward and threw his arms around Benjamin, weeping loudly. Then he moved to each of his older brothers, the very men who had once despised him, and kissed them, shedding tears until every ounce of past bitterness was entirely washed away. Pharaoh received the incredible news and commanded the brothers to take royal chariots and wagons back to Canaan to gather their entire household. When Jacob saw the Egyptian caravans roll into his dusty camp and heard that his most cherished son was not merely alive, but governing the known world, his weary soul was completely reignited. The entire family migrated to Egypt. Joseph rode his chariot out to the lush region of Goshen. The moment he laid eyes on his frail, elderly father, he rushed towards him, burying his face in his neck, and wept for a very long time. The shattered family was finally completely restored. For 17 peaceful years, Jacob lived in the fertile land of Goshen, watching his family survive the global famine and multiply greatly. But eventually, his time on earth drew to a close. The old patriarch blessed his 12 sons, prophesying over the future tribes of Israel, and breathed his last. To honor his father's dying wish, Joseph led a massive, royal Egyptian procession back to Canaan, burying Jacob in the same ancient cave as Abraham and Isaac. But with their father dead, panic seized the older brothers once again. They threw themselves down before Joseph, terrified that he had only been pretending to forgive them for Jacob's sake, and would now finally unleash his revenge. But Joseph wept when they spoke to him.
Do not be afraid. Am I in the place of God?
As for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, to bring it about that many people should be kept alive, as they are today.
He comforted them, speaking kindly to their hearts, proving that his forgiveness was absolute and permanent. Joseph lived to be 110 years old, living long enough to hold his great-grandchildren in his arms. But as his own death finally approached, he gathered his family around his bed to deliver one final epic prophecy.
I am about to die, but God will surely visit you and bring you up out of this land to the land that he swore to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. When God visits you, you shall carry up my bones from here.
He made them swear a sacred oath. Joseph died, being 110 years old. They embalmed him, and he was put in a coffin in Egypt. It is a stunning, quiet cliffhanger. The savior of Egypt, resting in a box, waiting for the day God would return to set his people free, setting the ultimate stage for a man named Moses. The life of Joseph is the ultimate proof that heaven never wastes our tears. You might feel as though those closest to you have shoved you into a dark hole, or that you are stranded in the shadows even when you have walked faithfully. These heavy burdens might look like the final chapter, but they are actually the training ground. The very things designed to tear you down are the exact tools God will use to lift you higher. Congratulations on reaching the end of this epic movie. For completing the journey of Joseph, you have officially earned the Unbreakable Dreamer badge. To claim your badge and show you made it to the very end, comment Unbreakable down below. Thank you for joining us. If you enjoyed this, please like and subscribe to see the next story. God bless.